time for the next video. Now, it's time to talk about the benefits of my three-part plan. I call it the three-part plan because it involves 3 steps. Assuming the plan actually works, there you go. So, what are these 3 steps? 1. Pay off the national debt. 2. Work to abolish taxation while running a surplus. And finally, 3. Absorb the other country's debts in exchange for control over their budgets and constitutions. Now, naturally, one may ask, why go through all this effort? Because such a plan would naturally take decades, or rather, it would take decades to finish because you'd eventually have to pay off the debts from the other countries. Well, let's start with the basics. First, there's the obvious. Pay off the debt. Let's start there. Now, how long would you guess that this would take? My estimates, assuming you follow my plan, would take 6 to 8 years. That is still a decent amount of time, but what do we get out of that? Let's say, hypothetically, the plan starts, okay? And it gets cut off, and only 4 years of payments occur. Well, with debt down, so too are expenses. And because of the massive surplus, the Republicans or Democrats, whoever takes control after 4 years, ends up having the ability to cut taxes or raise social spending to a decent degree without having much worry. Because think about it. If the taxes are raised to the point where they're, let's say, 10% higher than they are currently, maybe 20%, who knows, however much it takes to effectively pay off the debt within a short period of time, while simultaneously minimizing the damage to the economy. Well, that's easily able to be cut, so if the Republicans get in charge, they're going to do that. Simultaneously, that could fund a lot of social programs, so the Dems might invest in those. But also, importantly, they could cut it even further or expand their programs even further. Because without the debt, or rather with less debt, they've got more room to work with because now they're not paying down the debt as well. The expenses are less, so they can use less revenue. And thus, the burden on the average taxpayer is reduced, or they get more stuff out of it. Either way, it benefits. So, as a result, people prosper. Essentially, the benefit is flexibility. That is the end benefit of paying off the debt. It allows for the country to work quicker, rely less on expenditures, and rely less on taxes. After all, you wouldn't want every penny taken from you, would you? No, you'd want to keep something, at least a nickel. And so, by paying off the debt, more flexibility is allocated to the government. They can do more with less. Also, it decreases inflation because, well, less expenditure means less money entering the economy, and thus less inflationary pressure that comes from the money being added to the economy. Now, of course, there will be a short-term increase just because of the nature of, paying off the debt. It's putting money in people's hands. But long-term inflation would be down. So that's the benefit of this part of the plan. Now here's the question. What about the second part? The one that relies heavily on a permanent fund. Now, the exact time span that it would take, I cannot be certain, but if I had to estimate, 6 to 10 years would be my guess. Now, this depends on a lot of things, especially the flexibility of the economy, its growth, and any decreases that come from the previous policies. But 6 to 10 years would be appropriate for both abolishing taxation plus building a surplus. Because you gotta invest extra in order to have a surplus. Let's say the goal is 2 trillion. That's a good flexible amount, and it allows for the government to fund major emergencies or store up funds for a rainy day. So, what are the benefits? Well, for starters, there is an increase in wealth for the average person. Because think about it. If you're paid $15 an hour and you lose 10% of that to the government, that's $1.50 you don't have. So you're really getting paid $13.50 an hour in terms of practical use. Same with a business. If you make $100,000 and you lose 30% of that, in practice you made $70,000. So the wealth of the average person, once taxes are gone, goes up because there's no more taxes to take money from them. Also, so does economic growth go up. Because if people have more money, there's more demand for goods. More demand for goods means more purchases, meaning people are going to spend more money. Or they're going to save. Either way, the economy is growing or stabilizing to ensure that it can keep growing at a consistent rate. Whatever the people pick, as long as they're not just gambling it away, we win. And it comes with another benefit. Power in the dollar. Should probably note that credit would also go up as a result of this policy. The main policy of paying off the debt would increase the United States credit score and encourage more loans later if needed. But the second would increase power of the dollar, because removing taxation simultaneously means more dollars are in circulation. Which, while yes, the initial result would be inflation, the end result over time would be the dollar going up in importance, because guess what a lot of people are going to be using to buy goods? Dollars. If dollars are circulating and the economy is growing in the United States as opposed to other countries, well then, more power to the dollar. And indeed, the dollar would be reinforced as the backup currency of the world. And of course, there's just the moral benefit of not taking stuff from people. The surplus too holds an important value. It provides leverage. Let's say, for example, that a country is in desperate need of financial assistance. Say Mexico is finally deciding to deal with the cartels, so they need money to fund a military expansion that is used to destroy them. Well, the United States could lend them $2 trillion, and they wouldn't have to worry. Mexico could have its funds, the United States has credit, and can build on its surplus. Essentially, the United States would grow in influence as a result. And finally, assuming the debts of other countries. Now, in truth, this could take any time period, so the exact amount of years is uncertain. Though my estimate would say 30 years to pay it off, all of it, assuming that every country and their debts is assumed by the US. But what does this do for the United States and those other countries? Well, because it's done in exchange for power over their countries, it allows for greater US influence. the dollar would again grow in value. Because guess what? If now all the debts of the other countries is being paid in US dollars, the US dollar becomes even more important. And when, let's face it, countries are relying on the US to manage their finances, the dollar becomes even more important. And there are more benefits. Lower tax burden. Think about Japan's GDP to debt ratio. It's what, 300% currently? Combine that with high interest rates, and Japan's basically stockpiling interest more than the US stockpiles gold at Fort Knox. That means Japan can barely afford functioning infrastructure even if they raise taxes to the utmost levels. That isn't a good thing at all. But by assuming the debt, the United States is able to lift that tax burden off of Japan, thus allowing them to, say, copy the US method of abolishing taxation, or even just lowering taxes as a whole and trying to figure out how to manage their economy better since they ended up in such a state. Either way, for the average person in other countries, taxes will be lower because, in the end, the United States has essentially said, hey, all those taxes that had to go to that interest you were paying, don't have to pay it anymore. And guess where they're going to buy goods? Likely the US, the people who helped them. And thus, trade would go up. The world would become more interconnected. And because of the US gaining control of their budgets and constitutions, so would liberty. Essentially, the United States would help other countries follow its model to eventually abolish taxation and build surpluses. With the US potentially, no, this isn't a guarantee, but potentially, asking once the taxation was over to send some surplus to the United States to help pay off the debt that it assumed helping the other countries, thus ensuring both that taxes don't occur in other countries, while simultaneously helping to pay off the debt that it holds quicker, and thus eventually paying it off. And then we live in a world where not only do countries not have debts, or at least very low debts, but also taxation is negligible. That would massively increase trade. It would massively increase quality of life, liberty, and just general prosperity. It would be a very effective plan to eventually lead the world to a better place. Now, the max time this would take is 18 years for the first two. 12 years is the lowest. Now that's a decent time. Now, not a lot, given the whole fact that it is going from 130% of debt to GDP ratio to 0%, plus abolishing taxation while still running a surplus. Like, that is massive changes in less than a generation. But that's still a decent time when it comes to politics. To put it in perspective, 12 years ago was still Obama. 18 years ago, if we do the math, that is, I'm pretty sure that would actually coincide with Junior. So that's a long time to maintain uncontested, because for any practical political maintenance, especially in a polarized world as this, that would be very difficult. But maintaining it yields amazing results. There's also another thing to consider. If this is accomplished, loans would naturally be cheaper, because banks could more safely rely on governments to pay back loans. And that means more security, thus higher credit, because they trust the governments more, and thus loans would lower in interest. Now, would that be true for everyone? Probably not, but for most it would definitely be the case, and that would be very beneficial. But in the end, the big thing that this plan benefits is trade and economic power. This is not a plan to free the world, but to grow the economies of the world and establish an influence based around the United States and its economy. The best way to do that is, well, making it more effective to run a country. That requires, of course, dealing with the biggest problem of a lot of countries: their budgets and the debt associated with running it. And not only would this help, it would also help the average person who wants to start a family, buy a house, get a car. Because guess what? Those taxes you pay means less money going to your house, less money going to your car, less money going to your family. In the time of an affordability crisis, this would be a godsend. So in other words, while I mentioned flexibility up here, this would provide stability and ensure long-term growth so that this wouldn't be required in the future, and this provides growth and influence. This opens up possibilities, this stabilizes things, and this expands the principles outwards. And through this action, millions upon millions of people, if not billions, would be lifted from the burdens of taxation and from the massive deficits that their governments are currently dealing with, all while ensuring that trade flows efficiently and that wealth grows for the average person. In other words, everyone wins. It'll just require pain for the first few years. I have no question that this will hurt initially. There is no question on that. You do not pay off the debt in 6 to 8 years by being light on the tax increases and light on the budget cuts. No, this is going to require a massive shift, and it's going to hurt. But the sheer amount of benefits that people would see, everyday people, would see from this. First, the flexibility for the government, then the stability for the average person, and then the growth for everyone would be massive. And so, I fully support the 3-part plan, and hope you do too. If you want to debate me, well, go ahead.